everyone, my name is Brittany from Brittany Loves Reading, and today I'm here with part 2 of my April wrap-up. If you haven't had a chance to check out part 1, I'll link it up here. But basically, I had an amazing reading month in April and ended up reading 22 books. So I split it up into 2 videos, 11 books each, because if not, the videos were going to be way too long. So let's dive in and see what I read in the not really second half, because I did a lot of my reading in the second half, but in the second half of this 22 books. One of the books I read this month was the B&K Book Club book for April, and that was Britt Marie Was Here by Fredrik Backman. Fredrik Backman is one of my favorite authors, so I was expecting to love this. I did really enjoy this. I gave it 4 stars. It's probably my least favorite Fredrik Backman that I've read so far. It follows Britt Marie. Britt Marie is going through a divorce and takes a job at a temp agency and is placed into a role in a small town as a caregiver for a recreation center. This recreation center used to house a football club, and things happen that make Britt Marie the coach of this children's football club. We see Britt Marie kind of discover herself through this process, and that's really what this book is about. I did enjoy it, but I think the parts that I loved about this book were the community as well as Britt Marie functioning within the community, and there's parts of that I would have liked more of. However, true to Fredrik Backman's style, the writing I adored. I always find I could highlight everything in a Fredrik Backman book. There's so many amazing quotes. As well as the way Fredrik Backman can write a character. His characters are not always the most lovely characters. They are flawed humans, and we see their flaws very openly, but we see how they kind of learn and grow in each book, and I enjoy that part of a Fredrik Backman book so much. I also read Talia Hibbert's Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute this month. This is a YA romance by Talia Hibbert that follows Celine and Bradley. Celine and Bradley used to be friends, however, things happened, they are no longer friends, and they are in their senior year of high school and are fighting now for the same scholarship in a leadership retreat. This is an outdoor leadership retreat. It's very much camping in the woods, and they are both going out for it. Bradley suffers from OCD, so there is some great mental health rep in this book, as well as even Celine suffers from some mental illness due to trauma and things in her past. We see them rekindle their friendship while they are in this wilderness retreat, and then also start a romance. I had a good time with this, but I did only give it 3 stars. There was a lot of time in this book that we were inside the characters' heads and just kind of wrestling with, does he like me, does he not like me, and very much teenage thoughts. And I know this is YA, so that makes sense, but for me it was just a little bit too much to really fully love this book as much as I wanted to, but I still had a great time reading it, and like I said, gave it 3 stars. If you watched Wrap Up Part 1, you'll know that I had 4 5 stars in a row this month. 4 5 stars in a row. But that is not the end of the 5 stars. Oh no, I had a great reading month this month, not just in the number of books I read, but in the amount of 5 stars I read. And the next 5 star that I had was The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is a BookTube favorite. It did the rounds during spooky season on BookTube, and I bought it at the time and never got around to it. But I am so glad that I finally did. I adored this book. This was such an interesting book. It was hard. It is a hard-hitting book. There are some really hard topics covered in this book. Definitely check the trigger warnings, but it was fantastic. The audiobook, I highly recommend. I can't say enough about the audiobook. The audiobook is one of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. There are podcast and interview elements in this book, and it is done so well in the audiobook. This is a Carrie retelling that follows our main character, Maddie. Maddie is a young girl in her senior year of high school, and one day while getting out in the rain, her hair gets wet, and it becomes very obvious by what happens to her hair that it goes into an afro, and people in her school find out she has been passing as white. This school is extremely racist. They still have segregated proms. It's extremely racist. When the students at the school find out Maddie is Black, they start to ridicule her and throw pencils and get them stuck in her hair. It's atrocious. It's absolutely atrocious. Someone videotapes this because this is set in modern day. It's set in 2014. And someone videotapes this happening and puts it on the internet. And obviously the world is appalled by what is happening. And the press flocks, and the school decides to have basically its first non-segregated prom. They call it the All Together prom. Obviously, this is a Carrie retelling, so things happen at that prom. We also follow kind of like a more current day situation of a podcaster looking back at what they call the bloody prom and kind of looking into what led up to prom night in this small southern town. Like I said, this was fantastic. Tiffany D. Jackson outdid themselves with this book, and I can't say enough about it. If you haven't read this yet, even if you don't like horror, because I'm not a huge horror fan, this is excellent. Then I read Embrace the Darkness by Ashley N. Rostak. This is the first in the Maura Quinn series, which is a mafia romance series. I picked this up because I absolutely love Ashley Rostak's other series, the Witsex series. I'm obsessed. And I wanted to read the other series by this author. This follows Maura Quinn, obviously, who is the princess and daughter to a huge mafia empire. Her father is the head of this Irish mafia, and she is his daughter. She, 6 years ago, ran away from the mafia and started to live a normal life, but something has happened that has drawn her back in. Now that she's home, some of the boys that were around when she was younger are back in her life, mainly Jamie, and obviously romance happens. It is a dark romance. It is a mafia romance. Please check trigger warnings. It wasn't exactly what I wanted it to be because, to be honest, I didn't love the main love interest. There are other men in this story that I suspect are going to get pulled into being love interests for this character in either a polyamorous relationship or in a reverse harem. I don't know at this point. It didn't happen in the first book. But I am intrigued enough to continue. But for the first book, I only gave it 3 stars. I have finally read From Blood and Ash. This has been on so many TBRs and I have not completed it, but I finally have. I have Margaret from The Word Nerd to thank for this because I don't think I would have gotten through this book without buddy reading it with Margaret. Not because it was unenjoyable. I had a great time reading it. I just don't think I ever would have picked it up. I keep putting it off, probably because it's chunky. I don't really know. I just kept putting it off, putting it off, putting it off. So I finally have read it, and thank you, Margaret, for buddy reading it with me to make me read this book. This book I ended up giving 4 stars. I had a great time with this book. It follows Poppy. Poppy is the maiden and cannot be talked to, cannot be touched, has to remain pure. Poppy gets a new guard named Hawk, and obviously this is a fantasy romance, so things happen with Hawk. In this world, we have the Ascended, who are basically the people the gods have chosen to rule over this world. And then we also have the evil side of this coin, which is the Craven, and the Craven are vampires. And we see some political struggle between people wondering if we should still trust the Ascended with what's going on in our society, or if we should maybe revolt against that. There is a faction of this society that wants to revolt against that and is led by someone called the Dark One. So there is a political element to this book on top of the fantasy romance. I had a great time reading this. It read so quickly, even though it's so chunky. I devoured this book. I did find it a little bit predictable, but that's totally fine. I still had a great time with it, and I will be continuing the series. I also read The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz this month. I had a NetGalley arc of this and finally picked it up with a group of people as a buddy read. I know a lot of people love this book. I know that. I am not one of those people, and mostly because I don't think I would have picked this up at all had the synopsis been more what the book actually was. This synopsis really sets it up that this is a writing retreat and an isolated setting thriller, and it is that, but there is a whole other element to this book that has kind of like a horror twist. This is a book that I think a lot of people would describe as like a weird book, similar to like Bunny, not in content, but in style. And honestly, those types of books are just not my thing. They just aren't my thing. Like I said, this has a horror element to it. I'm not a big horror fan, and it takes a long time to get into the actual isolated setting thriller of this book. It takes a long time. This follows a group of women that go away to a writing retreat with a very famous author who is going to help them write a novel. One novel will win and the rest will not, basically. This book was not a favorite for me. The writing style wasn't my favorite. The horror elements wasn't my favorite. And honestly, there's a lot of girl drama in this book with the friends and the girls. And I'm not a big fan of books with girl drama. It's just not my thing. I know a lot of people love this book, so I don't think it's necessarily a book issue. It's more of a me issue. But if the synopsis was more true to what the book was, I don't think I would have ever picked it up to begin with because I would have known it wasn't something for me. That being said, for me, this was my least favorite book of the month and came out as a 2-star. Make Me Wilder by Serena Bell was another 5-star read for me this month. We're not done with the 5 stars. I think there's even one more in this stack. I had a lot of 5 stars this month. It's actually a bit excessive, but anyway. It was a great reading month. That's probably why I ended up reading so much, was because I enjoyed the books I was reading so much. This is the first book in the Wilder Adventure romance series. It follows Gabe and Lucy. Gabe owns an adventure company with his 4 brothers in a very small town, and you know I love a small town romance. They do like wilderness adventures and survival adventures, but their town is changing and becoming more of a wedding destination, a spa destination, and their business is suffering due to that. Their mother, who technically still owns the company, hires Lucy to come in and do basically a PR overhaul of this business so that the boys can still continue to do their adventure stuff, but also add things that maybe would be more relevant for females to go on as well as couples. Gabe and his brothers are not really sure they want to make that change, and at first Gabe and Lucy start off as somewhat enemies. However, before he knows who Lucy is, there is some serious sparks with Lucy. So enemies, but with some serious chemistry. This is a very smutty book. I was not expecting it to be smutty because there are ducklings on the cover, but it was extremely, extremely smutty. I was actually very surprised. If you are a fan of Tessa Bailey's writing style, I think you'd really like this. It really has the same vibes as a Tessa Bailey book. This is the first in the series. I've already bought the entire series on my Kindle because I loved this so much. I cannot wait to continue this series. I was right. I did have one more 5-star this month, and it was The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane. This shocks me none. I have learned that Alison Cochrane writes some of my favorite queer rom-coms. This follows Charlie and Dev. Dev is a producer for a show called Ever After, which is basically like The Bachelor. Charlie comes on the show as being the prince for this show, but Charlie is very socially awkward and does not come off well on camera, and it is Dev's job to make him look good and to get him to fall in love with one of the women on the show. Charlie and Dev have pretty much instant chemistry, and obviously this is a queer rom-com, so things happen between Charlie and Dev. Charlie has OCD and Dev has depression, and I really enjoyed seeing the mental health rep in this book, and I think it was done really, really well, in my opinion. That is also seeming to be a cornerstone of an Alison Cochrane novel, is that there is mental health rep in their books. There is a sequel or novella coming out for this book over the holidays, and I cannot wait to pick that up because I need more Charlie and Dev in my life. I finally read an Emily Henry book this month. It is my first Emily Henry, and it was Book Lovers. This follows Nora and Charlie. Nora is a literary agent, and Charlie is an editor. When they met years ago, they disagreed on a book and kind of became enemies in the literary world. Nora has gone away with her sister to this small town to kind of reconnect with each other, and they're going to be gone for a month, and when she goes into a store, she runs into Charlie. Apparently, Charlie grew up in this small town and is now home to take care of his parents who are not doing as well as he is hoping. They start off as enemies, and over time, obviously, there is a romance because this is a romance, kind of. I can see why some people don't call this a romance because it is more of a contemporary fiction with a romance in it. which was why I probably didn't love this as much as some people do. I am not a huge fan of that type of contemporary fiction. It's just not my favorite style. Also, I didn't overly care about the characters in this book as much as I need to care about them for the romance to matter to me. So for me, this book was just middle of the road and I gave it 3 stars. I also read Mia Sosa's The Wedding Crashers this month. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I had an excellent time with this book. I did not realize when I went into this that the main characters from The Worst Best Man were going to be in this book. It is slated on Goodreads as 2 standalone novels, The Worst Best Man and The Wedding Crashers, and I would somewhat argue that they are companion novels because the characters from The Worst Best Man do not just make cameos in this book, they're in a lot of it. I would almost say this is a companion novel to The Worst Best Man, so if you haven't read either, I would probably read them in that order, The Worst Best Man and then The Wedding Crashers, because that is the order of time in this world that Mia Sosa has built. This follows Solange, who is helping her cousin Lena, who is our main female character from The Worst Best Man, at a wedding because Lena is a wedding planner. Solange sees something that makes it very clear that this couple should not get married and makes the wedding not happen. Drew, who was the groom at this wedding, was actually only marrying his bride as a marriage of convenience because he wants to further his career in the law world and thinks being married and being in a couple will help that to happen. Something comes up after his wedding explodes and he needs a girlfriend to help him at a work function. So he enlists Solange into a fake dating scheme because frankly, it's Solange's fault that he doesn't have a wife to help him out in this problem anyway. Solange, because she does feel bad now that she knows the circumstances around the wedding, decides to help him out. And then eventually, due to something happening in her own family, she has to enlist Drew to fake date on her end to cover up something her mother said to one of her cousins. So it's like fake dating times 2. The smut in here was great. I really liked the relationship between these 2 characters. I had a great time reading it and loved kind of going back to this family that I met in The Worst Best Man. It is this big Brazilian family and I loved meeting them and seeing that culture in the first book, and it continues into The Wedding Crashers. I honestly can't wait to see what Mia Sosa writes next. We are at the last book that I read in April and we are ending on an odd note, and that is Cookies for My Orc Neighbor by Michelle Mills. This was a random one. I needed a novella for a video and this one was recommended and I read it on sprints with all of the besties and Crystal. We had a great time reading this book. We had so much fun, but that was more because we read it all together. I will say the writing in this was not good. This follows Grace. She is neighbors with an orc, and obviously this is a fantasy romance, so there is orc smut in this book. Grace has kind of been obsessed with her neighbor, the orc Alden, for a while, and the stalker vibes in this are a little concerning. The writing was not good at all, to be honest, but like I said, we still had a fun time reading this, especially all together. I honestly think that's the only way to read this book, is to like grab your friends and read it together. By yourself, I'm not sure it would hit the same. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was probably a 2-star book in actuality, but because we had such a great time, I bumped it up to 3 because of my enjoyment level. And that is everything I read in the month of April. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.